we are mildly interesting guys, and we talk about some stuff. So welcome to the podcast, we call it Joel the Podcast. It's Alex and it's Alex, here for Joel the Podcast. Bzzz. Hello everybody, I'm Alex.
And I'm Alex.
And this is our podcast,
Joel.
Welcome to episode 86 of Joel the Podcast.
Correct.
Well, now that I'm on track with 85 last week, I think I can, hopefully get on a streak and not mess too many up. It's when we take, a more than 1 week long break that I get off. So
that makes sense.
Welcome to episode 86. I wanted to remind everyone that Nathan does not owe me $1.
And Alex does not owe me $1. Despite the fact that we've been able to resolve several of our $1 bets.
So before we get into that, I wanted to real quick, I meant to say this on the podcast last week, but real quick apologize for the lower quality audio quality that we had in our episode last week. We just thought it would be way too much of a hassle to coordinate 4 different recordings and piece them all together, and it was just easier to use Skype's audio, so hope you didn't have too much trauma from that. But I thought it was an enjoyable episode. We're very thankful, obviously, for all of our guests that joined us last week.
Let us know if you want to come back. We're desperate.
Right. And if you want to come back, send us an email. Our email can be found at our website, alexandalex@joelthepodcast.github.io/alexandalex at joelthepodcast.website/index.html. I started thinking about other things in the middle of saying it. I started thinking about the fact that I took a breath, and then that made me mess it up. So,
well,
you know what it is.
If you're listening to this and you haven't heard our email address before, please email us about that. But also,
you can go listen to any other single episode of the podcast except for maybe one.
Yeah.
Since we created the email or website, and you'll find it. You'll find it. So.
Right.
All right. So going into the bets. So as Nathan and I mentioned, we made a number of bets based on our March Madness brackets, and it turns out that. We great minds think alike, but fools rarely differ. And so we picked very similar brackets.
Yeah.
And as a result, most of the bets we made are just going to be a wash because we did equally as well on them.
I like how you say equally as well.
Well, equally as bad, I guess you could also say. Both of our brackets are pretty much in the toilet right now.
Yeah.
Nathan, on ESPN, Nathan is 10 points ahead of me, which means he picked one more first-round game correct than I did.
I actually think it's the other way around. You picked one more first-round game, but I have currently one more second-round game.
Oh, okay. I didn't. Yeah, okay. I knew the second-round games were worth 20 points, so I was like, no, the 10 points means it must be a first-round game. But I get what you're saying. That makes sense. So. It's close, and we'll hopefully see as the rounds progress. Nathan's maximum possible score is slightly higher than mine right now, so I'm hoping to see some more of his teams lose. So that's and so just for if you're curious, some of the bets we made that are ties and washes. Most first-round upsets predicted. We both predicted the exact same ones. Well, we both predicted the exact same correct ones. Most correct first-round games involving orange teams. Whose winner is closest geographically to the real winner, since we both picked the same winner. We already know that's a wash. Who picked the biggest first-round upset that was correct. Who picked the worst upset that was incorrect, and who picked the results of a game involving Big Ten teams the least accurately. We didn't pick all the same results, but the teams, most of the Big Ten teams losing early on means that where our picks differ, which is the later rounds, end up not mattering for that bet.
Right. Yeah, so I don't think we've actually stated all of our bets on the podcast, so you just heard a bunch of them that ultimately didn't matter, but we do still have a few that are alive, potentially going to produce a winner by the end. So let's just go through those real quick. So as you stated, we both submitted a bracket to ESPN. ESPN has a scoring system for how well your bracket does. So our first bet is who has the better score for their bracket. Like you said, currently we're within 10 points. It's a very close match. Could go either way. Most correct Final Four teams. Both of us are already down to a maximum of 2 out of 4 correct. However, I think I'm a bit more optimistic about your 2 picks over my 2.
Well, we both have Gonzaga, so really there's only one difference because I have Baylor and you have
Florida State.
So
yep. So
I agree that mine looks a little better now, but I think Michigan is a pretty weak 1 seed in I guess we're getting into sports here. Michigan is a pretty weak 1 seed in Florida State's region. So it's certainly nothing's set in stone.
Let's just be clear for a minute here, actually, that we're not talking about sports right now.
We're talking about bets. Yeah.
So none of this actually. What's that?
I was gonna go into the next part about bets, but you should finish what you were saying.
I was just going to. I don't even remember what I was going to say.
I think you were saying none of this counts towards the sports minute.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of bets, I think we mentioned on the podcast that we were going to make fake sports bets and see how well we did.
Since sports betting was so easy.
Yeah, because we were like, surely we could predict like 60% of our sports bets correctly. Well, it turns out sports betting isn't actually as easy as we made it out to be.
Right.
Nathan's ahead at the moment. Pending the results of one more game tonight, though, I'm down about $650 out of my starting 1,000, and Nathan's down like 300 some or 200 some.
Yeah.
So
that's a real shame.
It's maybe once the games are all complete, we'll talk about more in detail about that. But for now, just know that we're pretty bad at it.
Yeah.
So.
Let's see. What else do we have here? Who had the biggest single game bet gain? Who had the biggest single game bet gain? So that's again referring to the fake sports betting. And I've got to say I'm pretty optimistic about my chances here, having picked Oral Roberts over Ohio State correctly. But, who knows? You could make some big moves here in the end.
I mean, the thing is, that since I know that bet is in play, so I'm mostly betting on the spread,
right?
Which means I'm betting based on, I think a team will win by a certain number of points or lose by less than a certain number of points.
Right.
And in the first round, I pretty much just put $100 on each of those bets, which means, and because Vegas is unfair, you don't just win $100 if you get that bet. So far my biggest gain has been $90.91.
That's pretty good though. I'd say other than my Oral Roberts bet, every one of my gains has been less than that.
Right.
So I've probably had more hits since I'm just betting straight up, but you're clearly more efficient with your money.
Right. So
it's just a riskier bet, I guess.
Right. So I think hopefully this is just maybe the optimist in me talking and not really borne out by facts and logic since I've lost 2 of my 4 second-round bets already. But as the tournament goes on, I think I will improve. Man, I really thought West Virginia at -3.5 was easy money. So I don't. Yeah. I guess I don't really know what I'm talking about. But
oh man. Well.
All right. Let's go into our actual sports minute.
Yeah, that's enough not sports. Let's talk about sports.
Yeah.
For 1 minute.
So.
And 1 minute only.
For 1 minute, here's the timer. And go. So the NCAA tournament started, as we alluded to. Tons of upsets so far. The biggest being number 15 seed Oral Roberts beating number 2 Ohio State. But also multiple 12, 13, 14 seeds also won in their first round matchups as well.
And actually, Oral Roberts won their second round matchup earlier today or yesterday or whenever that was. And
it was yesterday.
The second ever 15 seed to make the Sweet 16, which is pretty cool.
Yes, very exciting.
And their name is Oral Roberts, which is very funny.
Purdue lost in the first round to the University of North Texas, as everyone didn't predict, I guess.
Based on facts of this tournament, they are the best team from Texas, except maybe Houston. So, not too much to feel bad about there.
And that's our sports minute.
Cool.
IU sucks.
That's all we needed to talk about anyway.
Okay, so let's get into the episode. If you remember from 2 episodes ago, listeners, we're going to do more of our Would You Rather questions since we didn't get very far that episode. Actually, there was one thing I wanted to talk about first. And actually, Second thing, did we receive any emails?
Maybe. I haven't looked in a little while.
Okay, so let me say what I was going to talk about.
Yeah.
So I've had a bit of a unique experience because I've started listening to a podcast called it's called The Sanderlanche. It's basically one guy who's read all of Brandon Sanderson's books and his 3 friends who have never read them and are reading them for the first time and kind of like talking about them, and that's basically it. So it's only interesting for me because I've read all of the books before. But what's interesting about it is that it's a pretty small podcast, like ours. I mean, it's slightly larger than ours. And by slightly, I mean a reasonable amount larger than ours. But it's small enough that, they get, less than 10 emails per week, right? And so they can, they'll read all the emails they received that don't just have spoilers.
Yeah.
On the podcast, and so I haven't fully caught up to where they currently are. I'm still listening to episodes from last year at the moment. But I think I've been as I'm listening, anticipating when I catch up, emailing them because I have opinions and they're small enough that they'll actually read and respond to my email.
Yeah.
Which I guess I haven't really gotten that perspective as a listener. I mean, obviously, I'm on this podcast, so I don't email it, but I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is you're welcome, listeners, for being a podcast that you can interact with.
That's pretty cool. I think that's not something you get in many other places with the level of quality that you get here. So
exactly right.
That all being said, nobody emailed us this week.
That would have been an extremely nice lead-in to if we had received an email. So I guess it's a real shame that we did not. It really
would have. I actually had a discussion with David at some point during the week, and he said he was going to email us. So maybe he still will. Maybe he forgot, though.
All right. Well, we'll see. So hopefully we'll get the email on the podcast, but if not, we'll talk about it next week. So without further ado, let's go into the Would You Rather questions. If everyone remembers, I just wanted to remind everyone that I came into this with 6 questions, Nathan with 5, and I
also had 6 actually, if you remember.
I remember that you added a 6th one after the fact.
I mean, that's only somewhat true. I think by the time we actually started, I had 6.
You added 6 after
just like any respectable
you entered
podcast
with
host
5,
would have.
which is you entered the podcast with 5 is all I was saying.
I mean, maybe I entered the day of the podcast with 5, but by the time we entered the section of the podcast where we were doing Would You Rathers, I had 6.
You entered when we started recording the podcast.
Well,
you
that's
had
hardly
5.
relevant, right? Like,
well, that's what I mean when I say entered the podcast.
Yeah, well, that's just not a very good measure of how many questions I have. That's all I'm saying. Because I have 6.
It's the one that I'm talking about right now, though. So.
But as long as I get the last word, then I'm right. Let's move on.
I believe the last time we got through 2 of each of our questions. Did we get through 2 of yours?
We did, in fact, get through.
All right,
2
so
of mine.
we're gonna see how much we get through this time, but we have 8 questions to go, so here we go. Since I started last week's podcast or 2 weeks ago's podcast with more questions, I'll go first. Would you rather only be able to shout or only be able to whisper?
I think I was gonna say, okay, so like my gut reaction is that only being able to whisper is better than only being able to shout.
Right, same.
But are there situations in which not being able to shout is worse than not being able to whisper? And if so, how frequently would you... Because, like, I guess the thing that comes to mind, right, is if you're walking along with your friend and they step out into traffic and there's a car coming, right? And you're you're not close enough to grab them. And you just, whisper, "Look out, there's a car." I really hope that's, very strange on the podcast.
I hope it's just, very loud since you leaned into the mic.
I hope that made everybody a little uncomfortable. That's my hope. But point being, that's a pretty bad situation, whereas the problem with the other situation is you're yelling in places where it's probably inappropriate to make much noise. For example, if you need to talk to somebody at the library, or make a comment to someone while someone else in the room is on the phone or something like that.
Right. Well, I mean, so my immediate thought goes to first of all, my immediate thought goes to, in Parks and Recreation, Andy Samberg's character who just yells all the time.
Yeah.
But my first thought goes to an office setting.
Uh-huh.
And the thing about an office setting is both of these would suck.
Shouting
all the time would be really inappropriate and disruptive, but also whispering all the time, it would be impossible for anyone to hear your input, especially in meetings.
Right.
It would be and phone calls, it would be difficult.
Oh, phone calls would be terrible either way, because you'd get it's really, I feel like it's very inappropriate to whisper to somebody over the phone. Whispering is kind of a weirdly intimate thing to do, and there's absolutely no reason to do it over the phone, so when you do it, there's a sense of, I deliberately chose to whisper at you over the phone, and that makes me a little uncomfortable.
Now, the thing about phones is they're designed to be used right next to your mouth, pretty much.
Right.
So it's hard to if you have to whisper, it's hard to make yourself any louder. But if you're shouting, you can just hold the phone a little bit further away from your face, and then it won't be as bad on the other end. So I think for phone calls specifically, the shouting would be better.
Okay, I get that perspective.
I don't do that many phone calls, so that wouldn't be my main concern.
Yeah.
My main concern would be, as you mentioned, shouting in inappropriate places, at church or in an office or any number of places where you should not shout.
I mean, it pretty much, if you're not supposed to be speaking in any given setting, it makes it impossible to speak, because you have no way to speak discreetly.
Right, but the
which
exact
would be pretty
opposite.
inconvenient.
the exact opposite is true for whispering. Anytime where you're supposed to speak, it makes it almost impossible to speak without, at the very least, being weird about it. And at the worst, the person just not being able to properly hear you, like,
Right.
at all.
I think for isolated incidents, only being able to whisper is better. Because you can, like, make kind of a big deal about it and be like, oh, I lost my voice, you know, I'm not
Except
feeling
that,
well today or something, and like that's
right.
not great, but like only being able, I guess if you were shouting at people, you could say like, oh, I have really bad hearing, sorry, I know I'm being loud or whatever.
I think in either case, I would, like try to limit my vocal communications by as much as possible.
Yeah.
To like, you know, the point where I'd probably just like write things down on a whiteboard or something and carry around a whiteboard for like, you know, for everyday situations. Like, so given that the other thing is whispering is really bad for your voice. Probably actually worse than shouting all the time. Although probably not that much worse, actually. Yeah, shouting a lot would also be pretty bad for your voice. I guess both of these would be pretty bad for your voice. So, I guess the bottom line is, given the fact that I would try and limit my spoken communication, I would rather shout only, just for the situations where I can't, like, avoid speaking. I think shouting is generally safer, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, you can get things done with shouting more easily than you can with whispering, even if it might be uncomfortable or inappropriate.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, you know, there's definitely a weird thing to me. Like, I kind of agree with you, first of all, let me just say that. But there's definitely a weird thing to me about your two modes of communication being, like, silent, like nonverbal communication, and shouting. You know, like there's
Yes.
just a huge disconnect between those two modes of communication, whereas if you mostly don't talk but sometimes you whisper, there's maybe some sort of plausible explanation other than, you know, whatever contrived situation we're imagining is happening.
Other than you answered a would you rather that you would rather be able to only shout than only whisper.
And then it happened for some reason. So I guess, yeah, ultimately I'm gonna go with only shout. Because it seems like the easier one to accommodate without being really weird.
Right. All right.
So
that's a good one. What
all
do you
right,
got?
yeah.
What do you got on your end?
All right, so here's my first of my 4 remaining. Since I have 4 remaining. Would you rather know the full details of any historical event or know the general course of future events?
All right, you're going to have to specify what general course of future events means.
Yeah, so what I mean by that is essentially picture a high school history textbook written 100 years in the future of whatever event you want to know about. That's the level of understanding you'll have about that event. So, like,
right.
World War I to us is literally any future event to you, versus, you know, cinematic quality footage of every conceivable historical event you would want to know about.
Right. So my instinct is to pick the historical one, because I think that would in general be much more useful. It would probably be harder to make money off of that. But
right.
I feel like the future one, it would be less, honestly, less less useful slash I don't really know if it'd be less interesting, but I think it would be less interesting to know that, just because you don't know as many details, because you just know less information in general.
Right, that's true.
And what really you may, depending upon what events are going to transpire, be able to like make certain long shot bets or whatever. But I think what really throws a wrench in it for me is that if you know general future events, all right. So let me ask you this: Are you able to change future events? Like, for example, in 2001, if I knew that 9/11 was going to happen, because that's something that would definitely be in a textbook. Right. I guess I don't really think I'd be able to do anything about it because no one would believe me. And
I mean, so that's a really philosophical question. I think that could spawn an entire discussion unto itself, and I'm really curious to hear what the listeners think about, time travel and affecting future events from a philosophical standpoint.
I would say you would be able to affect future events just as a matter of course, but it would practically be extremely difficult to do so because any events that you actually knew about would be on a large enough scale that you wouldn't be able to do anything about them.
Yeah, that's an interesting... So imagine you knew about 9/11 before it happened. Realistically, you could have reported it. You could have maybe... I don't know. That's really complicated to think about, right? Because like you could have maybe... I don't think a high school textbook would contain all of the names of the people involved, right? You couldn't like hunt them down in advance.
You wouldn't know who was involved. I doubt you would even know what the flights were. Like, I don't think that would be in it. So all you would know is that pretty much that there were going to be planes flying into the World Trade Centers and the Pentagon.
Right.
And that's pretty much it. And that it would be the morning of September 11th. Like,
yeah. And actually,
honestly,
I think that's even kind of a short-sighted application of this talent too, is like trying to affect the immediate future, because I don't think literally any action you take in your lifetime is going to have very much effect on the general course of events 1,000 years from now, right?
Right. So, I mean, that was kind of my, I guess when I said more information about if you'd pick the past one is not necessarily true, because you didn't set a time limit on the future. So, like... Exactly. You could literally know, like, billions of years worth of information. But still, I just don't know what you do with that. Like, I feel like the best case scenario with that ability is you are able to play the stock market better. Like, I think that's the best case. I can't think of, like, what other benefits you would get from that other than, like, feeling like you're in the know.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, right? Like, you just... That's a pretty good benefit of, like, you pick 40 years from now, what's the general tech atmosphere like, and then when the companies start to pop up, you invest in them or whatever. I think it's actually really, for me anyway, it's probably not true of the general population. I think it's more interesting to consider both of them for the sake of knowledge, right? Like, there's certain benefits that could be gained from either one. Like, I actually didn't even think of, like, one of the very first things you said I hadn't considered before, but knowing any event in the past would make you a very good detective, for example.
It would,
or a lawyer. I
mean, first things first, it would make you the number one historian who not only has ever existed, but could ever exist in the future.
Yes.
Like, any person could ask you any question about any historical event, and you would know the exact answer, plus much more information than they could possibly want to know. And, like, honestly, it would almost be... I feel like it would almost be a detriment to where if you're not spending time writing down, you know, historical information that only you could ever know, you are literally, like, wasting your life. Like...
That's a fair point.
It's a disservice to humanity for you not to be doing that.
Yeah, so when I came up with this question, I still don't know my answer, by the way, even with all of this discussion. But essentially, what I was thinking of was, you know, sure, you could in theory have encyclopedic knowledge of all past events, but the kind of mechanism by which I'm picturing this happening is not that you are literally stream of consciousing the past all the time, but like anytime you want to recall something, you can.
No, I understand that.
So
I understand that that's what you meant. I was just thinking, like, you know, like events that, you know, we really don't know what happened. Like think about the life of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is a little bit, you know, maybe outside the realm of what we want to talk about in this podcast, but you would know what Jesus did and didn't do for a fact.
For a fact, yeah.
Like, you would know, like, what, you know, what you I can't even put into words. I can't even put into words to what I'm trying to say, but, like, if you weren't spending your time... Oh, hey, Shelby. If you weren't spending your time...
Alex says hey, by the way. She says hello.
Okay. If you weren't spending your time trying to recall facts that have been lost to history or that there was historical dispute upon, it would be a waste of your time.
Yeah.
Is what I was saying. Which is a big burden to bear.
It is. You're right. But I think it would be very interesting to... I think what your life would be is basically a series of interviews by academics. You could probably auction off your time at a fairly high rate to, you know, any historian who was trying to research something in particular, and you could give them essentially a first-hand account.
Right. That's a good point. I didn't even think about the money aspect. Like, I
think the same could be said of the future, though, as well. You know, I'm sure there's money to be made in literally knowing the course of the future.
Well, the future would be much harder to monetize in that way because, like, for the past thing, it's very easy to prove your ability.
Right.
But with the future, it's much harder because... More than likely, like, what events will you know in the next 10 years? Maybe 1 or 2 things at most, right? So, like, how are you going to prove to someone that you know the future? You're going to say, oh, in 2024, you know, man is going to land on Mars. Which, A, isn't, like, an outlandish prediction that someone who didn't know the future couldn't have made. But B, also isn't going to come to fruition for another 3 years. Mm-hmm. So, I feel like as far as that goes, you would have a much harder time of, you know, proving that you actually knew the future.
Fair enough, yeah. All right. What do you think?
So coming down to it, I think I would have to choose the past one, because even though I don't want to like having the burden of just knowing all that information, I think it's just overall much better than the future stuff. So that's what I would pick.
All right, I really think I could be talked into either one of these choices with enough of a discussion, but I'm gonna agree with you based on what we've talked about so far. I think it would be, you know, valuable to humanity to know the exact events of the entire past.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would just also be, downright interesting.
Yeah, it definitely would be.
So
It's
that's
like
that.
it's like watching. It's like, have you ever seen like the movie about the Social Network, which is like about how Facebook was founded?
I haven't seen it. No, I know what
Well,
you're talking about though.
I imagine the real life events were probably slightly less interesting than the movie, but still, like, you could know that about literally anything.
Right.
Really, would be really cool to see some of that stuff. So,
Right.
okay, that was a good question. Here's the next question. Would you rather have eyes that could film everything or ears that could record everything?
Ooh. I'm tempted to say eyes because, like, day to day you use your eyes more. But I feel like being able to record the audio might be more useful to you.
Right. I don't know that you use your eyes more than your ears, actually. I guess for us, for our jobs, you almost certainly do. But what I would say is eyes, what's definitely true is that eyes record much more information than ears do.
Yeah.
So, but you're right, in that, well, I don't know, why did you say that recording audio would be more useful?
So I think a lot of the information that you would want to get from a visual recording is some sort of like one-to-one, like you want to watch it back. That's the point, right?
Right.
And so it's the same thing with audio, but in my opinion, you get a lot more value out of sped up audio than sped up video. So your information density can be increased. Like if I were to sit and listen to a 40-minute lecture, I feel like I could reasonably listen back to it in like 20 minutes and get the exact same amount of value. Versus if I'm watching something visually sped up, I might need to, if there are parts of it that I want to pay particular attention to, I would need to, slow that part down or something like that. On the other hand, though, that's true because I think, kind of what you said is you just get so much more information visually than you do over audio, right? Like a lot more detailed information.
Right. Like, the thing is, what you're talking about can just be accomplished with normal recording technology. You can just record a 40-minute lecture with your phone and listen to it later at 2x speed if you want already. So...
That's true.
So
I guess the question... Yeah, so that's a very good point, is if you want to record something, that technology exists. So this situation helps with when you want to record something, but at the time you didn't know it, right?
Well, there's a number of situations. So one is that's one where you didn't know that you wanted it to be recorded, but now when you go back, you can be like, oh, glad I recorded that. Number two is you don't want to be obvious that you're recording. Like, yeah, you can film stuff with your phone, but, like, you don't always want to just be holding your phone up filming, right? That's not always what you want.
Right.
Especially if what you're recording is, like, an experience that you don't want to be, like, taken out of the experience by having to film it. Or the same can go for audio as well. Like, you don't want to have to be... Although that's less... Actually, recording audio is less intrusive. Now that we talk about it, I'm honestly trying to think of a situation where the audio would be would be useful at all, rather than just recording something with your phone outside of, like, remembering something that you didn't know you want recorded.
Right.
Because I think there's just way more uses for visually recording something. Well, though, the problem is, like, having a visual recording of something without any audio is actually not as useful as you might think. Like anybody talking, you won't be able to tell what they're saying. You know, which is, I guess that's the main thing actually that I'm thinking of. Like if you have a video
Right.
of that involves any speaking, you won't be able to hear what they're saying. Which,
Right.
if you have audio, even though you won't be able to see what they're doing, that still can be useful.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think it's a very good point that there's not a whole lot of upsides to the audio aspect because it's pretty simple to just have a device on your person that's recording audio all the time. Like you could probably just genuinely do that if you wanted.
Right.
But if you don't have audio, if you just have like a silent video recording of, I assume, whatever you're looking at, right? You can't like...
Right, yeah.
It would just be what you had seen.
Yes.
Like how many times do I actually think I would find use from knowing what I had seen previously? Is it searchable? I could actually like when I'm trying to like find something that I had seen previously so that I could get information from it again, I guess that would be a nice use for having recorded previously.
Right.
Or would I have to know that like on September 29th, 2019 I looked at this thing?
So, I mean, it doesn't really say, obviously. The way I read it is that, you know, whatever you see is now on, you know, in the cloud, and you can go look at it whenever you want. Or whatever you hear is now in the cloud, and you can go listen to it whenever you want. So,
sure.
You probably couldn't, like search in the sense of, you know, search for, you know, when I was at the amusement park and have it know when that was. But if you knew you had this ability, I bet you could come up with a system to be like, to tag, you know, your video or audio to be like, okay, this is when I did this, and this is when I did this, so that later on, you know, you'd be able to... What it seems like the argument is coming down to me, is that audio in general would be more useful, but you can just record audio now anyway.
Right.
So it's not actually that much of an improvement over normal life.
Right.
So, which makes me want to pick video, because I feel like, you know, the main use of this would be just being able to view things like memories. Like, maybe I really enjoyed that camping trip, so I can go back and watch through my own eyes exactly what we did on that camping trip.
Right.
Which would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's
whereas
definitely valuable.
I feel like the audio one would be not quite as useful for that. I'm trying.
It would be more utility based, I think, than kind of interesting experience based. Yeah.
Right.
So. All right. It seems like we're coming down to an agreement.
Yeah. So I think I would choose video. Do you think you would also choose video?
I think so.
All right. Let's hear your next one.
Okay. Would you rather be a master of sleight of hand or genuinely be able to do one simple card trick with real magic?
Honestly, I feel like I don't know if I don't want to say we've had this one, because I don't think we had this one, but I feel like I've seen this question a number of times.
Yeah. Maybe we have done it. Maybe that's what secretly inspired me. But
so, would you rather be a master of sleight of hand or be able to do one simple card trick but with real magic?
Yes.
Honestly, the sleight of hand seems better off the top, right? Because, you know, like thinking about, I assume my first thought goes to putting on a performance, right?
Right.
So already people who are currently amazing at sleight of hand can be very famous and, you know, have shows in Vegas and whatever, and be on TV and stuff like that. So the thing with the real magic is you would have to be known as the guy who can do real magic, right? Because your trick is not actually that interesting in and of itself. Either way, there's very little actual sellable content you can do with that, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess what it comes down to is, do you want to be able to do real magic? Because from a purely utilitarian benefits point of view, the sleight of hand would be much better.
Right. I think my initial thoughts are, if you're really good at sleight of hand, you will obviously be able to impress the general population, but others who are skilled at sleight of hand will understand what it is you're doing.
Well,
I'm not saying that's good or bad.
Right.
But if you can do genuine magic, you can just completely baffle anybody.
For the record, I feel like, I'm not good at sleight of hand, but I know what people who do sleight of hand are doing. Right? Like it's not like I watch a sleight of hand show and I'm like, I have no idea how he's doing. I'm like, okay, I know it's sleight of hand, and it's still cool to me. So I would think that a similar thing might apply to even people who are good at sleight of hand. Like if you were really good at sleight of hand, other people who are also good at sleight of hand would probably appreciate what you do, and not just be totally unimpressed.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
But you're right about being able to absolutely baffle people. Right. So the thing is, I don't know if I was suddenly became amazing at sleight of hand. I don't know that I would suddenly become a magician, right? Because I'm not a showman, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Outside
of the podcast context, where sleight of hand magic doesn't work particularly well.
If you've ever seen a magician's show, it's 50% magic and 50% just the magician themselves being funny and entertaining as an entertainer.
Right.
Which I don't think I could really do.
Yeah.
Right, at least right off the bat, I would obviously probably be able to do it with practice and stuff, but
sure, yeah.
I don't think that I would just suddenly become a magician. So with that in mind, is it really better to be able to do that versus a literal magic trick? Because I feel like once you eliminate that as your main use for this ability, it comes down to just impressing your friends and family.
Yeah,
right?
Day to day, would you rather be incredibly skilled at something that's fairly difficult, or literally magic?
Right. So, I tried to talk myself into the real magic, but I think I still would choose the sleight of hand just because, if you're good at sleight of hand, there's any number of tricks you can learn to do.
Right.
So it's not like if you only know one real magic trick, you're going to show it to people and then that's it. You can show them again, but it's it's really not as interesting the more you show it to them. So
they'll be like, "How did you do it?" And you'll be like, "Literal magic." And they're like, "Oh, cool. Can you do anything else?" And you're like, "No.
Nope, just this one simple card trick."
But if you would like to pick another card, I will definitely be able to guess that one as well.
Right.
Yeah. So we've got literal magic being balanced by the fact that in the end it's kind of bland.
In the end, it's pretty lame, even though it's real magic. It feels weird to say that, but it's true.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not completely turned off by the fact that it's pretty lame.
So
I
you're
feel like
enticed. You're enticed by the fact that it's real magic. That fact alone.
I'm enticed by the real magic. I'm picturing the layers that you could add to the trick, your one basic trick, to like give it a veneer of a crappy magic show, but then
Right.
it's a good magic show because it's literal magic. But it's it's not very repeatable. It's all you can do. So
Right. I'm just imagining like a comedy show where you just do a bunch of terrible magic tricks that don't actually work. And then like you just end the show by doing this like absolutely mind-blowing like cuz the thing is, even though it's a simple trick, as long as you're, like I can imagine a bit where you explain how this trick would normally be done by magicians.
yeah,
And you take meticulous steps to show that's not what you're doing.
yeah,
Like, no forced choice. All the cards are different. Like, literally all you have to do is blindfold yourself and step into a different room and have them look through the deck themselves. And you eliminate, like, 90% of what actual magicians do.
yeah.
So, like, it would be possible to... So I'm imagining, like, a comedy show where you do a bunch of terrible tricks and then end it with this, like, amazing actual... Like, you're building this trick up, and so, of course, everyone's expecting it to be nothing, but... because that's what your whole show has been, but then you get it right, so...
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's pretty alluring to me. I think if I'm being honest, I think I'm not going to be able to effectively talk myself out of real magic, no matter how lame it is.
That's fair. I'm just looking at my Switch and realizing that I put the Joy-Cons on backwards, and I didn't even know you could do that.
Nice.
So, all right. So let's move on to the next question. What are we at here? 51 minutes.
Yep.
All right.
Probably got time for one
case,
more or two.
One more each, I think. In that case, I'll skip to my better of the two remaining questions.
Okay.
Would you rather never be slowed down by traffic or never have to wait in line?
Now, of all times, is an interesting time to ask this question because it's been about a year since the last time I waited in any lines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not quite been that long since the last time I was in traffic, but I'm also very, very infrequently in traffic, I would say in general. I am in lines more than I am in traffic.
Okay, but think back, way back to 2 years ago.
Oh, that's impossible. I can't do
back
that.
when, because I suspect, before long, you will be waiting in more traffic and more lines.
If we're lucky.
Yes.
Okay.
So, see if you can cast your mind to that headspace.
It's a very vivid memory that I'm conjuring up of me standing next to some other people. I'm a little bit uncomfortable, but,
My initial reaction is to pick lines.
Yeah.
Because in general, I don't spend that much time in traffic anyway.
Yeah, traffic is kind of like the 1% of life that it's annoying when it happens, but like if you look at your time as a whole, in the past year, I've probably spent a total of like 1 hour in annoying traffic. And I know that's because I, under normal circumstances would have a fairly short commute along not very busy roads. So like maybe my answer would change if I lived in a much more congested city center or something like that.
Right.
But traffic is just such a small part of my life. It is so much more annoying than waiting in a line, though.
It really is. It's like unbelievable how annoying traffic is.
It's weird that I can sit in this chair for an hour and do the podcast, but if you made me sit on the highway for an hour, like in place, that's wild. I didn't know you could do that either. Okay, now imagine like playing it in a mirror, like holding it up to your mirror and play. Yeah.
You can't play it.
Oh, really?
I think my Joy-Cons are dead. That's
Oh,
depressing.
like battery dead, not you didn't kill them by putting them on backwards.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, that's good to know that they don't charge, but...
Wait. Now I'm wondering. Like, if I take this off yet. Oh, no, it's not dead. Alright. We probably should do this after the podcast. So...
What were you talking about? Something about traffic.
Right, you were saying that even though you don't sit in much traffic, it's like 1,000 times more annoying than waiting in lines.
Yeah, it's just like traffic is the worst thing. It's so irritating to be in a thing that moves when you're not moving.
Yes. And you can't do anything else. That's the worst part about traffic.
Yeah.
You have no choice but to sit there and do nothing.
Especially if it's like moving traffic, because then you can't even look at your phone or whatever, because you've got to like drive.
Right. The thing about lines, right? So like lines, like 95% of the time, waiting in a line doesn't annoy me at all, or a very little bit, right? Because they're not that long lines. Really, the only situation I can think of is like amusement parks and sports games where you have to wait in long lines for things. That this would be like worth it to pick the lines version of this ability.
Oh, but that would imagine how great that would be if you went to Disney World and didn't have to wait in any of the lines. I feel like your trip would get at least 2 times better just from being able to do things all of the time instead of wait in lines.
It would be better, but how frequently are you doing that? Once every couple of years? I definitely wait in traffic more than once every couple of years.
Yeah, that's true. But on top of there being a good, like a fairly sizable benefit in that scenario to never waiting in lines, like I assume I would never have to wait in a drive-through line or a line at the store or, any number of smaller conveniences that would still build up.
Is a drive-through line traffic or a line?
Oh, no.
I mean, it's clearly a line, but it's just funny to think about.
It's the traffic version of a line. So maybe you get the drive-through bonus either way.
Either way, yeah.
Anytime you show up to the end of a drive-through line, it becomes traffic, and since you don't have to wait in it, that means all the cars in front of you just drive through the drive-through without doing anything, and you get to go to the front.
Right.
That's the other thing. Are you just, in this instance, like cutting to the front of lines and nobody says anything about it, and that's cool? Or like, anytime you go to do something, there just happens to not be a line for it?
There's just happens to be no line or happens to be no traffic, I think.
Okay.
In either of these scenarios.
Got it.
And so you make me want to pick line. The thing is, okay, so the majority of the times that I'm in traffic this is literally the majority of the times is driving into Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Oh, I've just revealed my location.
Well, not really.
You're
not currently in Philadelphia.
That's true.
You may be very far from Philadelphia, and you just go there frequently for some reason.
For some reason.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but, like, so I guess it depends upon what I do. Like, I could generally avoid that by not going to a city, but I don't want to not go to a city.
Right. I don't know. The other thing about traffic is I tend to encounter traffic, and I think this is probably true of many people, when I'm already on a long trip.
Right.
Like when I'm just going around town, there's no traffic. It's not that busy. But like if I have to drive somewhere and I happen to pass by Chicago and it's busy,
Remember
that's
when you had to drive to my house?
Oh yeah. That was a marathon of a trip.
Yeah. I remember you and Joel complaining a lot about some of the traffic on that trip.
It was the trucks. It was the trucks on 2-lane highways that just felt like they could pass each other whenever they wanted.
Right.
And they would go like 0.5 mile an hour faster than the other one. You know, so it'd be like 10 miles you'd be driving behind these two trucks, and one of them is slowly gaining on the other.
No, listen, I've made that drive a number of times now. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. That's pretty much the worst. I had almost never driven on a 2-lane interstate. You know, very, very rarely until I made that trip.
Don't you have to drive on a 2-lane interstate to get to Purdue from your house?
No, I actually would drive on a more of a country road, state highway type of thing, which was 1 lane either direction, but you could pass for most of it.
Right.
And also people tend to speed on it anyway, so
right.
There's no big trucks. They all go on I-65.
All right. Well, I think what I've talked myself into is never waiting in traffic? Yeah, I think that's what I've talked myself into. But I honestly think that if I was in your position, I would choose the opposite, just because you don't go into situations where you would be in traffic as much.
And in fact, I am going to pick the other situation. I do think that, you know, the many small benefits of never waiting in lines in day-to-day life, combined with the very specific benefit of when you go to Disney World, there's no lines for the rides you want to go on. That's gonna do it for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Why don't you read your last one?
All right, let's close it out with this one. Would you rather have an infinite supply of muffins or get $10 every week?
This is a good question. $10 every week doesn't really do anything for me, I would say. So I right off the bat, I think the muffins are a much better deal.
I think I'm curious what the monetary value of the average number of muffins I would eat in a week is. I feel like maybe that's a more fair comparison, and I just didn't bother to do any math here. So let's assume that you can buy a muffin for $1. And let's assume, well, I mean, $10 probably isn't that far off then, right? Because, like, if you had an infinite supply of muffins, would you eat hundreds of muffins every week? I mean, I would not, right?
But I would say that the actual monetary value of the muffins is actually outweighed, like the difference is outweighed by the fact that I assume, at least in this scenario, I don't have to go out and buy muffins. I just have muffins. I just always have muffins.
That's
or
true.
They're delivered to me, or something like that.
Yeah. Point being then that the cost of a muffin isn't really important because the value of a muffin is just higher than that. My point. Or the value of infinite muffins is higher than that.
My point was that I think your idea was that if the money is worth more than the muffins, then you may as well just take the money and buy muffins. I don't know if that was really your point, but that's what I took from what you were saying.
Pretty much, yeah. Like so the point is you got to have some equivalent to. So, like, would you rather have X dollars or X dollars, but you're forced to spend it on muffins?
Right, and my point was just that, you know, the actual act of having to go out and buy muffins outweighs the actual cost benefit of that method.
Okay.
Right? Like
that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Like, basically my thought is $10 a week to me is like, let's say it's worth five benefit points. Which is very low. And having as many muffins as I wanted whenever I wanted is worth like at least 20. just because I like muffins, even though the actual monetary value is less. That
Sure.
was a terrible way of explaining it, but
let's take
I think
these
everyone
arbitrary
understands what I'm
values
saying.
and assign arbitrary numbers to the arbitrary values.
It was an extremely complicated way of saying I would just prefer having the muffins over the money.
Right.
Because the effort of turning the money into muffins isn't worth it.
Okay. Interesting. For a second, I couldn't tell if those sirens were like real or what. I don't know if you can hear them on the podcast.
I cannot hear them, although I can see the flashing lights out in your window.
Yep. Unfortunately, our listeners cannot, so that was probably just a totally unnecessary tangent. The question I was going to ask was, there's definitely a limit somewhere that will make you flip your answer from muffins to money.
Right, so like how much money would it take a week before I would rather have that than infinite muffins?
Than infinite muffins, absolutely. Assuming that you are eating the muffins and not selling the muffins.
Right. Okay, so number one, $100 I'd take the money.
Yeah.
What about $50? That's like $200 a month. I'd take the money. I think that might be pretty close to my limit. What about $25? I would take the muffins. What about $35? It's like $100. I would still take the muffins. I think $50 is around my limit.
So unlimited muffins is worth $50 a month. So if we priced a muffin subscription service...
No. $50 a week.
$50 a week. Sorry, you're right. So if for $50 a week,
just for the record, I wouldn't pay $50 a week for infinite muffins.
You would just.
That's just how much money you would have to pay me not to have infinite muffins.
I wonder if that would be the same answer if you already had the infinite muffins, though.
Yeah, I have a feeling that if I actually had the muffins, the amount of money I would trade it for would be less. Because right now I don't have infinite muffins. You think you would take less money? If I had the muffins already,
need to take more money.
No, I think it would be less because I would be like, all right, I've had enough muffins for one lifetime.
I don't know, like, I'm not sure if I would get tired of muffins. There's many different types of muffins that you could have.
So would you also take the muffins over the $10?
I would take the muffins over the $10. I think the more interesting discussion was the follow-up of what is the limit.
So what is your limit? I was just establishing that you would take the muffins first before we got to the follow-up.
Right. So, I think I might take the muffins over $100. I think that's obviously not like monetarily worth it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But since I don't already have the money, I think it's nicer to have the muffins. I'm definitely in the same boat as you, in that I wouldn't pay that much for infinite muffins. But I think it would be closer to, let's see, what would it be? If you gave me an extra $100 a month, that's like $100 a week. That's $400 or $500 a month. Well, that is pretty significant.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that you would take the muffins over that.
I don't know. I do feel like that's kind of close to my tipping point, though, because, like...
$50 is definitely too little for you?
I think $50 is too little for me. Yeah, it would be nice.
$75?
$75, maybe $75 is the right balance. You know, you got
between 75 and 100 sounds like around your area.
Right. You're getting several hundred more dollars a month, not a couple hundred more dollars a month. Certainly anything more than several $100s a month, I would take the money. But, you know, somewhere in that balance of, like, you're giving me $300 or $400 a month versus literally unlimited muffins, that's the range for me, I think.
All right, listeners, send us how much money you would have to be paid not to have infinite muffins.
Yep.
Or your thoughts on any of the Would You Rathers we discussed. I feel like we should have had listeners emailing about our Would You Rathers, and we haven't had a single email about them.
No, nobody's ever actually... I think typically we don't get people engaging with the content of the episodes. I think we get people engaging with the gimmicks of the episodes.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, so... I don't know. Maybe our podcast is just like 10 minutes of stuff that like encourages listeners to email us about just absolute nonsense, and then 40 minutes of background noise, you know?
I feel like no one would listen to the 40 minutes though, and it's definitely not true that they don't, or at least some people don't. So it's not true that some people don't. What I mean to say is some people definitely do listen to the content. I guess it's just not engaging enough to be worth emailing us for.
Yeah.
So
this bit right here definitely feels like a gimmick. So I feel like maybe we could get people to email us about why they don't email us.
Yeah, email us about what's so unengaging about our content.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I don't know why I did that.
Really mean roasts only, please. I don't want any constructive criticisms here.
Wait a minute. I was thinking the exact opposite.
Would you rather
only nice compliments, please? No.
Would you rather get a bunch of very, very kind, constructive emails from our listeners, or just get absolutely destroyed by people who hate our content?
Definitely the first one, but I can see the appeal of the second one.
Yes.
Now, here's the real question. Would you rather get like 10 emails of constructive criticism or like 1,000 emails of hate?
On one hand, that would be incredibly depressing. To just get 1,000 emails, literally 1,000 emails of people who are like, I listened to your podcast and it was terrible and you both suck on a personal level. However, on the other hand, I think the value of 1,000 people listening to the podcast, I would just stop, at that point. I'd just be like, man, we have listeners. Look at that.
Like that's the thing. Like if we received 1,000 hate emails, probably some of them would say what they disliked, right? And maybe we could, improve so that next time we got 900 hate emails and 10 positive emails, and 90 people were ambivalent. I wonder if it's better to start from 10 loyal listeners or 1,000, enemies of the podcast. I love that term, enemies, because I feel like friend of the podcast is like a term that's used. Now I want enemy of the podcast to become a term.
All right, so if you've been listening, but you've been holding off emailing us because you couldn't think of anything nice to say, I want to officially invite you to send us some hate mail, just so we can see if you're out there. Oh yeah, for sure. Even if you like us and you like the podcast, I'd be really interested to
send us a funny roast, and we'll read it on the podcast, and we won't even feel bad.
Yeah. So.
Or make fun of you. I feel like this is not gonna go well for us, but I've said it and I can't take it back.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. I don't think we have anything else.
Nope.
I'm Alex.
I'm Alex.
And this has been
Joel.